Access Minnesota. Issues that matter to you. Access Minnesota brings you the newsmakers and the stories that shape our everyday lives, with analysis from University of Minnesota faculty experts. Now, here's Jim Dubois.
The University of Minnesota Board of Regents recently approved a tuition increase. At the state legislature this past session, the university received less than half of its budget request. This has put significant strains on the university. This month on Access Minnesota, a conversation with University of Minnesota President Eric Kaler. We'll look back at the 2016-17 academic year and ahead to the challenges the university will face. Eric Kaler has served as the president of the University of Minnesota since 2011. President Kaler, welcome back to Access Minnesota.
Glad to be with you here today, Jim.
It was a challenging legislative session for the University of Minnesota and for higher education in general. The U requested $147.2 million from the state this year. The legislature voted on an education bill that ended up providing the U with $54.62 million in new funding. Why did the U receive less than half of its funding request?
Well, there is a historical pattern. This actually is a slightly larger dollar amount than we received from the legislature 2 years ago. And it reflects really a shrinking allocation to higher education in general. The overall budget target for higher ed, which includes Minnesota State and the state grant program, was not very high. And that in turn reflects the pressures that the legislators feel in terms of providing for K-12 education, health and human services, other priorities for the state. So over time, the amount of the state budget, the fraction of the state budget that's gone to higher education has decreased. And as a consequence, the amount of money available for the U is smaller, and we get a reasonable share of it in a real sense. The legislature, in some sense, did provide only $55 million. The other way to put it is the legislature provided $55 million, which is a lot of money. We're grateful for that. It's going to fund some really significant things at the university, our physicians training in family medicine, cancer care, clinical trial network across the state of Minnesota, and many other good things. It's not as much as we asked for. We had ambitions to do more, but it's a good investment. We're grateful to the legislators and the governor in particular for his leadership to get us that allocation.
In June, the Board of Regents approved tuition increases, two of them. First of all, 2% for undergraduates at the Twin Cities campus, and then 1% for the Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester campuses. Were these increases a direct result of the lack of funding from the state, or was there a need to increase tuition based upon expenses that were already projected?
Well, we work very hard to minimize the tuition increases that we ask our students and their families to pay. And we, on the other hand, have two principal sources of funding, the state of Minnesota and tuition revenue. So we have important expenses. We have the cost of recruiting and retaining very talented faculty and staff. We have expenses related to debt service, to utilities, costs that go up. And so we're forced to look at increased revenues. Those, as I say, come from the state and from tuition. And as I mentioned, the state allocation was not all that we had requested, not all that we needed in order to keep tuition flat, and as a consequence we had to ask for what are relatively modest tuition increases for Minnesota residents, and continues a trend over my 6-year period as president in which the overall increase in tuition has been below the cost of living in Minnesota.
What do you say to students who are worried about tuition increases and are worried about the costs of higher education in general?
Well, we are all worried about that. It is nonetheless an enormously powerful investment in yourself, in the person who's getting that education. Data show that lifetime earnings of someone with a college degree are more than $1 million above what would be earned with just a high school diploma. So it's a good investment in yourself, even if you have to take out loans to get that done. And again, 43% of our students at the undergraduate level graduate debt-free without student loan payments. We also have a robust financial aid program that, together with the federal Pell Grant and the Minnesota State Grant and the University Promise Scholarship, provides more than tuition support for our low-income families. So There are ways to get it done, but I don't mean to minimize the burden that we are asking our students to pay when we put forward a tuition increase. We take that very, very seriously.
Tuition on the Twin Cities campus for non-residents, non-reciprocity undergrads will increase 12.5%. Is there a concern that this could make the U of M less competitive nationally?
Well, it's important to put that in context. Right now, the University of Minnesota, out-of-state tuition, non-resident, non-reciprocity students, people from everywhere that's not North or South Dakota or Wisconsin, is the second lowest in the Big Ten. It's only higher than the out-of-state tuition in Nebraska. So we feel like we offer a great product, and we feel that we can move the out-of-state tuition level to be more in accord with that of our peer institutions.
What do you make of these cuts to higher ed funding in the state? Is this just the politics of the Republican Party, or are you worried that this is a long-term trend in the state, defunding essentially higher education? Where do you see funding for the U coming from if you can no longer rely on state funding?
Well, as I mentioned a minute ago, this decrease in the amount, the fraction of the state budget that goes to higher ed is a long-term trend. It has been true for both Democratic and Republican dominated legislatures and the governor's office. So this is a trend. It's unfortunately a trend across the country, and again reflects the values that decision makers place on health and human services spending, K through 12, other competing priorities for the state budget. I believe we tell a great story about how important higher education is. I think the citizens of the state of Minnesota realize the value of higher education. So I hope that continues in the public dialogue and will stop the disinvestment, the decrease in investment in higher education.
Some young people were drawn to the presidential campaign of Bernie Sanders, and he made a pledge that he would find a way to make college free for anyone who wanted to attend. Is this something the U is thinking about, the possibility of free tuition?
Well, obviously free tuition is a wonderful thing if you're the person who's not paying for it, but declaring something free doesn't mean that it doesn't come with a cost. So shifting the burden of paying tuition from students and their families onto the government is certainly something that could be done, but that's another tax consequence and something that decision makers would have to think carefully through. It makes a great soundbite though, and people are excited about that possibility. But again, as I mentioned earlier, if you look at the combination of the state grant program, the federal Pell Grant program, and the university's Promise Scholarship, we make the university free in the sense of covering the cost of tuition with grants, not loans, for a good fraction of our low-income population. So in some sense, college is already free for them.
The education bill passed by the Minnesota legislature included policy provisions that impact the University of Minnesota. When Access Minnesota returns, a look at how these policy provisions could impact the university's mission.
Access Minnesota will return after these messages. You're watching Access Minnesota. Here's Jim Dubois.
And now a look ahead to the future of the University of Minnesota with President Eric Kaler. The state legislature's education bill also included some policy provisions such as capping student fee increases and providing resources to parents and pregnant students. First of all, how strict are these provisions?
Well, my reading of the law is that the provisions themselves are worded pretty strictly, if you will. I think the Board of Regents and our offices haven't sorted through what that law actually means for the University of Minnesota, given the constitutional autonomy that we enjoy. So I think some work needs to be done to interpret exactly what the impact of that will be on the University of Minnesota.
Do some of these provisions impede the U's mission to be a competitive research institution, especially the provision such as the requirement to report on the U's use of human fetal tissue?
Well, human fetal tissue, and again, this is fetal tissue that's obtained from elective abortions, is a delicate topic to many people. Many people feel very, very strongly, and I respect their feelings a great deal, that anything to do with an elective abortion is bad and should not be allowed. We are respectful of the fetal tissue that we do use, and it's used very rarely and only in situations in which no other material would enable the research to go forward. And it's important to remember that this is the kind of research that could, for example, reverse paralysis or cure a devastating disease that right now is taking people's lives. So it's important research. We treat the material with respect and dignity. We have agreed with the legislatures for whom this is an important matter on some protocols, on some reporting that I believe satisfies most of their concerns.
There's much talk about a growing urban divide, not only here in Minnesota, but nationwide. The University of Minnesota touches each of the state's 87 counties through extension. You have the satellite campuses. Yet it seems that a lot of Minnesotans are not connecting themselves to the University of Minnesota in ways they might have previously. What do you attribute that to?
Well, there's a lot in that observation, so let me unpack it in a couple of ways. Number one is, first and foremost, we recognize our important connection to the state of Minnesota. We are the University of Minnesota. We're not the University of Minneapolis. We are the University of Minnesota. And we take our land grant obligations, our engagement in research and agriculture, the work that we do through extension, and a variety of other statewide efforts very seriously. So it's important to us. Just this year, we started a Minnesota Sparks initiative, and we've sent 3 faculty members out to Greater Minnesota to give talks in the communities to help connect the research that's done at the university to people in Greater Minnesota. We've created a land grant legacy scholarship, which is based in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resource Sciences, CFANS, that provides scholarship support to students from Greater Minnesota who want to come to the U and study in that college. So there's a variety of things going on. As to the why there is this feeling of disconnect, I think it's a consequence of where we are in society. The U 50 years ago was the game in town. If you wanted to listen to a football game beyond the high school level, you listened to the Gophers game. If you wanted medical care, advanced medical care, you could come to the U or to Mayo. Now, just on the sports side, there are many avenues available for people who want to be sports fans, and the internet has brought availability of those sports events and others easily into the home. So a little bit of a change in the U's position in society overall. That's amateur psychology. I might be completely wrong in that reasoning, but I'm not wrong in the fact that we take our obligation to the state of Minnesota very seriously, and we're doing a lot to continue to strengthen it.
There was a time in the not-so-distant past where virtually any student who graduated from a high school in Minnesota and met the requirements could be admitted to the University of Minnesota. As the university's reputation has grown, the quality of the students has grown, it's becoming more difficult for students who may not be at the top of their class or have high ACT scores. Why do you think the legislature in the education bill put a provision that greater recruitment of Minnesota students in rural areas and outside of the metro will be required of the university going forward?
For us to be a top 10 public research university in the United States is a huge asset to the state of Minnesota and something that we should be proud of. Now, what that does mean is that students who we don't believe project to be able to succeed here typically aren't admitted. And that's actually also an appropriate thing for that student. We don't do anybody any favors by admitting a student who's going to come to the U, struggle, perhaps drop out with some student debt and go on their way. We work really hard not to have that happen. On the other hand, we do provide a significant pathway for students who start at a 2-year institution, a Minnesota State institution, for example, and then want to transfer to the U. We have one of the largest transfer classes of any of our peer institutions in the Big Ten or elsewhere. So there's an avenue to the U, even if your high school record might not enable you to get in as a freshman.
How does the U of M balance its mission as a university that serves the state and a university that is a world-class research institution? Is there a legitimate concern that as the U grows, it may leave many Minnesota kids behind?
Well, we work hard not to have that happen. And again, 70% of our students are Minnesota high school graduates, 70%. It's a big fraction. So it's not a situation, as is the case in some other state institutions in which it's 50-50, or in some cases a slight minority of the students are state residents. It's 70% for the system overall. We're very mindful to this. We are, as I said earlier, the University of Minnesota, but we do have global ambitions and we do have global impact. The research that we do does span the world, and we have students from 130 countries studying on our campuses, which is a good thing because those students, by and large, return to their home countries with a great connection to Minnesota and to the United States. They become thought leaders and business leaders in their home countries, and that leadership and its connection to Minnesota and the United States, I think, is really important.
How has the U addressed student concerns over issues of discrimination on campus? Tell us about the campus climate and other measures that have been put into place to address these concerns.
We've spent a lot of time on that over the past 12 to 18 months in particular. We have a bias response network that works with students, faculty, or staff who feel that there have been instances of bias. We try to promote conversation. We try to help people understand why something hurtful might have happened and help the other people involved in that to understand why that's not the way we want to treat one another. A real focus on campus climate, on being a welcoming place, being a place that celebrates diversity, that people can come and be students, do research, be part of this university without fear and with a great deal of comfort about their personal safety.
76 bias incidents were reported on campus between February of 2016 and February of 2017. Tell us about these incidents and how do they affect the campus as a whole?
Well, there are a variety of scenarios in those instances. Each one is a little bit different. But we did have a situation on the Washington Avenue Bridge where a couple of panels, one owned by the college Republicans, one owned by another student association, were vandalized and hurtful things were said. And we brought people together and had discussions and conversations about what that means to one another and how that kind of behavior and the creation of that kind of climate is not something that we want to be part of the University of Minnesota.
Are bias-related complaints and hate speech on the rise on the university campus?
I don't think I would say they're on the rise here, but they represent the conversations that are going on around the country. It's no secret that politics in the United States is probably as polarized as it's ever been in my lifetime. Maybe the Vietnam War was another point where the polarization was strong, but there are a lot of people angry on both sides of the political divide, and that anger sometimes results in violence, sometimes results in hateful speech, and that's not what we're about. I often say that the best cure for hate speech is more speech. Talk, understand, take care of one another, and understand the other different points of view, even though you might violently disagree with them.
How can the U encourage students with different backgrounds and opinions to participate in a constructive dialogue? Well,
that is something that really requires leadership by faculty and the administration to create a space where people can come together and have those painful conversations without fear of retribution of any kind. We try to create those spaces, we do create those spaces, but people have to be willing to come and put themselves out there, so to speak. And sometimes people are, and sometimes they're not.
Did you hear any of the international students at the university express concern about President Trump's proposed immigration ban?
Oh, very much so. We have a Center for New Americans that recently received a significant gift. We have a lot of research and engagement around immigration law and around providing protection to our students, faculty, and staff who are from outside the United States and are here in a variety of immigration status. So yes, we did hear a great deal of concern, particularly from students from the 7 countries involved in the original travel ban. A lot of concern, and we've reached out and tried to provide them appropriate legal help and support as this ban navigates its way through the court system.
How has the U addressed incidents of sexual assault on campus?
We are incredibly invested in providing resources for the survivors of sexual assault or sexual harassment, and we're doubling down both on our policies and on our training around this issue. We put in place some new policies that in fact call for mandatory training of faculty and staff in the prevention and reporting of sexual assault and harassment incidents. We have a new Regents policy being developed that will amplify our response and our structure around that. So we're taking it very seriously. Our Aurora Center is a national leader in providing support to the victims of sexual assault. But one sexual assault is one sexual assault too many. So it's critically important that we engage our community of students, faculty, and staff around bystander intervention, around understanding where the rules are, and understanding that we're not here to take advantage of one another. We're here to help people.
Mark Coyle just completed his first year as University of Minnesota Athletics Director, and P.J. Fleck was hired as head football coach earlier in the year. Tell us about these two gentlemen and how they are trying to change the culture of the athletics department at the university.
Well, they are not trying to change the culture. They are changing the culture. Mark is a tremendous individual, a wonderful human being, and a very skilled athletics and academic administrator. So we're extremely fortunate to have him. He's brought a different culture, a very different tone at the top, different senior leadership into the department, and has made it very clear about the boundaries of acceptable behavior. P.J. Fleck is incredible. He's got energy, but he's also got integrity, and he's got a plan, and he's got a vision, and he is going to help Gopher football become very, very strong again, both off the field and on the field. And he has made a change in the culture of that football team in the few short months that he's been here.
When Access Minnesota returns, we'll continue our conversation with University of Minnesota President Eric Kaler about the U's plans to expand health sciences education.
Access Minnesota will return after these messages. You're watching Access Minnesota. Here's Jim Dubois.
Now back to our conversation with University of Minnesota President Eric Kaler. Tell us about the plans for a new health sciences education center.
Well, we were very fortunate to receive funding for the Health Sciences Education Center from the legislature. We talked earlier about operating expenditures and that we did not get as much as we had asked for. On the other hand, the capital investment that the state made in the university is the second highest dollar amount in history. It's a really tremendously strong investment in the future of this great university. And the centerpiece of that investment is the Health Science Education Building. This will enable state-of-the-art education in all of the health sciences, not just the medical school, and provide a 21st century space for the education of these doctors. The way education is carried out now in the health sciences is very different than it was 50 years ago. So there's much less sitting in a large lecture room and much more conversation and peer-to-peer interaction and peer-to-instructor interaction. And this new space will facilitate that very, very nicely.
How has the Rochester campus expanded in recent years, and how does that campus provide a unique approach to healthcare education?
Well, we're really fortunate to have been able to get the Rochester campus started about 10 years ago. Chancellor Lemkuhl, the inaugural chancellor, has announced his retirement later this summer, and so we will miss him very much, but are encouraged about the trajectory and looking forward to bringing the next leader on board. It's, as you know, in a real sense of partnership with the Mayo Clinic. They have about 650 students now at the Rochester campus focusing on health care, health science majors, and a very strong entering class coming in the fall. So we've successfully launched. We'll continue to look to grow and continue to work with our friends at Mayo to provide the healthcare workforce for the future.
The Grand Challenge curriculum was launched in 2015. Why are these courses important for the U's mission?
Well, it's really important to understand that the problems in front of society now are complicated and they're hard, and they require the expertise of people from different disciplines. So you need somebody from a science background, you need somebody from a marketing background, you need somebody from a public health background to come together and work on a problem like clean water or like providing food for healthy food for our populations. And so by bringing faculty together from these different disciplines and teaching an integrated course that brings these different points of view from different disciplines is incredible for our students. It's a wonderful opportunity for them to see how experts from different fields can come together, collaborate, and work on solutions to really difficult multidisciplinary problems.
We're seeing a profound transition in the workplace. More talk now of a gig economy where someone doesn't necessarily graduate with a degree and get a job and stay with that particular company or even that particular profession for their entire working career. They may not even have a regular paycheck. It may be up to them to be entrepreneurial and start their own, hang out their own shingle, so to speak. We also have issues with automation that impact not only manual labor jobs, but jobs also for the professional sector. How is the university adapting its curricula to deal with this changing workplace and changing requirements for job skills?
Well, that goes back to the grand challenges conversation we just had. Part of our ability is to equip our students with a range of skills across different disciplines so that they are able to go out and work from gig to gig, as you say. But again, part of what we do at the U is provide for our students the kind of foundation they need to be successful. What do you need to do? You need to know how to communicate. You need to understand yourself and how you interact with others. You need to be numerate. You need to have a sense of where we've been, that's history, and where we're going to go. So a foundational liberal arts background, either in the liberal arts themselves or as part of a science and engineering education or a business education or another specialty is really important. And it's that foundation that the university gives that enables people to launch into that arc of a life that, as you say, is not as predictable as it was perhaps when we were graduating from college.
Looking back on this past academic year, what stands out as a highlight for you?
Well, it's all about the success of our students. We graduated 15,000 students across all fields and degrees this year, and that's a remarkable shot in the arm of the Minnesota economy. And some of our employment statistics are really remarkable. Large fractions of our students are gaining employment before they graduate or immediately thereafter. So there are a lot of stories of student success. And I'm very glad to see that we're again one of the top 10 public research universities in terms of the amount of research that we do. We again attracted an entering class for this fall that has the highest academic metrics of any that we've had before. And in fact, is a few hundred more students than we anticipated would accept our offer. So we're popular, we're growing, and we're getting better every year.
University of Minnesota President Eric Kaler, thanks so much for joining us on Access Minnesota.
Thanks, Jim.
That's all for this month's edition of Access Minnesota. We'll see you again next month. Thanks for watching.
Access Minnesota. Issues that matter to you. Join us again next week as we bring you the newsmakers and stories that shape our everyday lives. Access Minnesota is produced by the Minnesota Broadcasters Association in cooperation with the University of Minnesota's College of Liberal Arts.